Hello everyone, hope you're having a wonderful day, and this is lesson number 8. This is lesson number 8 in our dive into the wonderful world of music theory. And today my friends, we are going to be talking about ledger lines. We're going to be talking about ledger lines. These are small lines that you put above and below the staff in order to solve the problem, essentially too many pitches, too little space. So let me elaborate on what I mean by that. So hopefully you've watched the other lessons before now, and I briefly touched upon ledger lines in my class video, and we were in that video discussing that we learned all about how we write down pitch in music, and that you can put a note on, let's say, a line that actually looks on a space, or you can put a note on a line. These are the ways you can position a note, right? But what you might have realized is that that only gives us about 9, if you count it out, 9 positions to put our notes in. And even if we use the treble clef to sort of split, the musical pitches into higher pitches and lower pitches, we still are limited to 9 pitches. Just for context, it's like 9 keys on the piano, and there are a whole lot more than 9 keys on the piano, even on only the right side. So we are basically don't have enough space with just 5 lines to represent all the pitches that we might want to. For example, we can't write any pitches which are pretty low or any pitches that are pretty barely high. We barely crack an octave with these 5 lines. And the main way we get around that is by extending the staff with small little lines, which look something like this, which we place above and also can be placed below the staff. And what you'll realize that this does, and these lines are called ledger lines, by the way, if you didn't surmise already, briefly touched upon these in that video. Ledger lines. And what these help us do is, instead of writing music with 6 lines or 10 lines or 15 lines to get around this problem, right? Because writing like that would not only clutter up the music and make it much more complicated to write, but would also leave a lot of unused space which could be just used to write the music more compactly, right? So it's not a good idea to write music with 10 lines. Instead of doing that, whenever we come across the situation where we want to write a note which falls above or below the staff in terms of pitch, like a note that's higher than the highest line or lower than the lowest line, for that specific note we add small lines. You can think of these as extending the staff to account for higher pitches and to account for lower pitches. And yeah, that's basically in essence what ledger lines are, and that's why we use them. So to give you an idea what it would look like, if I wanted to write a note which was one line above the top line or the fifth line, one line above, I will make a small line barely enough to cover the note, right, away from the just above the top line, and this distance should be the same as the regular space, right? And I would simply place the note head on that line and draw the note stem. So note head, note stem, and this, you usually want to make sure it's very apparent. And this is how you would essentially use a ledger line. You could do this maybe for even two lines above. Now for reaching the limit of what white background I have here, but hopefully you'll still be able to see it. You could even do this for 2 lines. You could put 2 lines above the staff, and you could place a note head there and draw the note stem. And you could, in fact, hopefully, if you understand now, you could do this indefinitely. You could have 3 lines, you could have 5 lines, you could have 15 lines, you could have 100 lines if you wanted. Though at that point it would be a really big pain to write, and like it would be basically impossible to read. So if you need to write 100 ledger lines, you might want to consider changing your clef, which is what most composers do. But regardless, you can do this indefinitely. But in music, the maximum we usually go to is usually 5 to 6 lines above and 5 to 6 lines below, like the maximum. Any more than that, as I said, we change the clef. So hopefully you've understood what this allows us to do. It's basically allowing us to extend the staff lines without having to write 15 lines each time. Just for the specific note which goes above the staff, we add in these extra lines. And this is not, you don't only use lines, you can also use spaces. And okay, actually, before I go to spaces, let me demonstrate what it looks like below the staff. So same thing, you can keep a note on the line and draw a stem up, or you could do that for one line, or you could even draw two lines and do it like that. So if and we get to now, you might be noticing that when you want to write only one note, which is only one line below, you only use one line, all that stuff will come to later. So you can do this above and below, that's the point. So if you want to dip below and then you want to use a lower note, then what the bottom line is, you can also put lines below the staff to do that. Now, as I just mentioned, this is also applicable for spaces, and the way you do that is above. Well, what about the first space? The first space, which is a consecutive pitch above the top line. Well, the way you do that is just, you don't even need to use a line, and we'll get to the specifics of the rules of how ledger lines work in a bit. But yes, so this means the space directly above. But if I wanted to move to the next space, I draw one line, one short line. These lines are short, barely the diameter of the note itself, and like this, and that's the space above the there's basically two spaces above the fourth space, or the space above the space, whatever. You understand the point. If there was a staff, this would be that space. You can also do this of course as you go down. So my apologies for that. You can have a note which, this is one space below the staff, and this is two spaces below the staff. So hopefully you're getting an idea for how it works. Now this section of it was just to give you an intuitive understanding for how it works. And if you're much more content learning type of person, which I respect, there are some rules which you can follow. Right now, again, rule number one. I mean, these aren't really rules; these are just conventions, and I'm sort of just listing them in the form of rules. Rule number one: ledger lines, as I've already mentioned, should only be barely bigger than the diameter of the note in question. So that means that they basically have to be really small. So that you don't want to have, I'll just show you what I mean. In note head. So I don't want to have a ledger line that's this big. No, this is wrong. This is not how we've chosen to write music. No. The ledger lines come in uniform length, and that's just about this big. That means I can write a note on it where you can still see the edges of the lines coming out. It's barely bigger than the diameter of this note head. Okay? So that's the length. You can't have a bigger one. And what it also means is that, let's say I have one note here at one line above the staff, and I want to write a note that goes two lines above the staff. As you may have surmised by now, I do not connect these lines. I do not do this. This is wrong. These lines must have a small space in between them. Now, as for why we do this, it's a convention. I presume that it's to make the music look a bit more neat, but I don't really know for sure. But this is the convention. So we do not ever link these lines together. If we have notes in succession which have ledger lines, so we do not link them together. That sort of comes under this one as well. I can just write, maybe I'll write it as a separate rule. Don't link. I'll just keep it short. So don't link them together. Okay. Now, third rule, and this one is what's going to give you intuition for how to write it. Now, this is sort of summarizing it. Use as few lines. Use as few lines as possible, essentially. This is the thing we're trying to go for when we're using ledger lines. So, whenever you use ledger lines, you want to use the least lines possible to convey the message that you want to convey. And the reason we do this is, again, not to clutter the music. And so now what this means practically, let me give you the practical thing. When we are writing notes which want to fall on lines, when I want to write a note that goes on a line, I just draw that many lines above or below the staff, right? For example, if I wanted a note that was one line below the staff, I would draw one line, place the note there, the note head there, draw the stem, and I'm done. I do not draw more lines than that. Well, I should probably make it more clear. I do not draw more lines than that, right? As you can see here, I do not draw more lines than that. Let me just draw it again for you. Don't draw more lines than that. I don't draw less lines than that. It's just one line. If I wanted two, I draw two lines. Done. So I draw two lines, and that's it. So you don't draw more lines. But so yeah, if you want it to be 5, 6, 7 lines above the staff, you draw that many lines and you simply place it there. Now in the case of spaces, you want to again try to use as few lines as possible, but this is slightly more in a different sense for spaces. So as you may have surmised from what I had done earlier, what happens when you want a note that goes one space above the staff? Well, I could write it like this. So I draw the note and I put a line above. Let me just make sure that's very clear. And I put a line above. I could write the note like this, but then you have to think to yourself, is that line really necessary? And the answer is no. If I look at it like this, I can tell that it's one space above the staff. I can tell. So due to that, I don't use this line here because it's unnecessary. What if I wanted to go two lines above the staff? Sorry, two spaces above the staff, my bad. I will draw one line and boom. I could draw a line up here, but as you may have surmised, I don't need to. The meaning is conveyed with this, and drawing another line there just makes it look messy, so I don't. Similarly, when we're going down, if you want to draw one line below the space, again I don't add a ledger line. Simple, like this, because adding one would clutter the music and it's not necessary. If I want to go two spaces below the staff, hopefully you can guess by now, I add one ledger line, add the note head directly below it, not cut by it, directly below it, and boom, that's my second space below the staff. Again, I could add another line there, but that is unnecessary, so I don't do that. Now if you want a much more hardcore, no, hardcore is the wrong word, but a much more analytical definition for it, when so basically when writing notes above the staff, I'll shorten it here to when writing notes which go above the staff, only spaces, when we're talking about spaces, only include lines which come below the space. Okay, and when we want to go below, yes, we want to go below the staff, only include lines which come, oh, forgot to come here, which come above the space. And these two rules are for spaces, when writing on spaces. For lines, I'm sure I've already explained, it must be self-explanatory, just write it on the line. So once again, if I wanted to write one that's one space below the staff, I don't need to write any lines because there are no line. I don't need to use a ledger line because again, I don't the line that's above the space is already there. If I want to write one that's below, that's one below, let's say, the second space below the staff, I will write one. All the lines that come before it, that come above it, as you can see here, that come above the space. And let me just show you. If I wanted to do three spaces, I draw two lines and do it for the same reason. So I'm only drawing the lines that come above this particular space. I don't draw this line that comes after it because it's unnecessary. Up top, exact opposite. So only the one that's come below. Again, the one that comes below is already part of the staff, so I don't need to draw a ledger line. If I want to do one more space above, only one line. Boom. If I want to do two lines above, same concept. And if you don't want to remember it like this, just think of using as few lines as possible. Try to use as little lines as possible, as little ledger lines as possible to properly convey the meaning. So these are the rules essentially which surround it. and hopefully you got a good understanding of why we use ledger lines and how we use ledger lines. Now, one thing before we end the lesson, now just to get a practical sense for what this would mean. Um, as you can see, I've got a treble clef here, so we can actually try to figure out what pitches different ledger lines would correspond to, or I should say, no, pitches which go above the staff. So let's talk about the first pitch which goes above the staff. Let's talk about that. This one. Now, if you watch my treble clef video, you'll know that these pitches move in a sequence. Rule number one, they're in a sequence, so it's always A, B, C, D. It's not B, F, G, uh, D, A. It doesn't move like that. It moves in a proper consecutive sequence. Rule number two, you only address natural pitches. So if this top line, which under treble clef is F, which it is, you can double check with the acronym or my method, whichever one. Then what is this? The space above F going to be the pitch that comes consecutively after F? Well, that's going to be G. I'll let it up top here. This note is G. So this pitch is G. What about one line? One line above the staff, like this. So I encourage you to pause the video and think about it. Well, if once again, if this was G and this is one line above that, is directly above that in sequence, it should be A. Or you can again just go with F. So F space will be G. Remember that when I'm drawing a line, there is a space there. So count that space. F, G, A. And this is A, indeed, in the treble clef. And what if I want to go two spaces above? What is this? Okay, again, so you can either just say, oh, it's B, because I know this one's A. Or once again, I should probably make this stem a bit longer. Let's try counting from F. Let's try counting from F. Let's do that. So we count from F. We count from F, the space between the space is G, line is A, and O, B. So F, G, A, B. Similarly, if I wanted to go down the space directly below the first line, drawing lines with this tablet is pretty hard. So bottom line in the treble clef is E. Once again, you can use the acronym or you can use either one. This is E, right? Now what about the one that comes directly below that space? Well, that's going to be D, because it's directly below. Again, order. What about this, the one line below? Again, you can either say, okay, it's this one below, so that must be C, or you can just say, okay, E, one space, D, okay, C. You can move down like that, same thing. So E, D, C. Remember that when there are lines, there are spaces in between as well. When using legend lines, there are spaces in between the legend lines as well. Okay. Then what about two spaces below the staff? Oh God, I'm so sorry. Yes. What about two spaces below the staff? Same thing. You might surmise that this must be B, because D, C, B. Or look closely, E, count the space D, count the line C, and B. So again, using those two rules which I taught you that lesson, and again, they're not really rules, this is my way of making it palatable, yes. So using the two rules I taught you when we were talking about the treble clef, these are how you do the ledger lines. And okay, one thing before I leave you, let's have some fun. Can you tell me what this note would be? So just to make it clear, there's three ledger lines about the staff. Three ledger lines. And I encourage you to pause the video and figure this out. Same method. So the stop lines F, try counting the space line, space line, space line, and try to figure out what it is. And I'm waiting. And hopefully you pause the video and try to figure it out. And it is indeed E. We're going to confirm this: F, G, A, B, C, D, E. It's indeed E. So yes, that is the way in which it works. Now hopefully we found this lesson useful. We talked about ledger lines, and hopefully you're able to apply them. I once again linked a worksheet where ledger lines are present. One part of the worksheet is talking about whether it's true or false. For example, if this would be false because you don't need that line, right? And one part of it is just identifying the notes. Identifying the pitches which are present there. So if this is with ledger lines, like what was there when we learned the treble clef, So you'll have a pitch like this and you have to identify it's A, or a pitch like this and you have to identify it's B, etc, etc. And I really encourage you to go do that worksheet. It's linked after this lesson, because as I keep on saying this, as with practical music, the key to understanding theoretical music is practice. So I've written it extremely badly here. It is indeed practice. So I really do encourage you to go try that worksheet, try your hand at it. And if you have any questions, you can always email me. All that stuff is at the end of the video. So anyways, hopefully you found this video useful. Hopefully you learned something. Hope you have a wonderful day ahead. Next lesson we're going to be talking about how to write sharps and flats, which is bound to be interesting. And from my side, I'll see you next lesson. Bye.